Greetings from the Humongous, the Lord Humongous, warrior of the wasteland, the Ayatollah of rock and roller. So, hi everyone, it's your old pal King Washbinator here. Second time of doing my little Thunderdome tonight stream. Largely just trying to establish the habit of doing it. Unfortunately, I did a stream earlier in this afternoon, and I kind of exhausted a lot I wanted to talk about today, specifically regarding the unrest in America. So unless anyone wants to pop into the chat and bring up some sort of topic regarding all that they would like to hear me talk about, I'm going to instead go over a few things that I have going on with Dungeons & Dragons just to fill space. Like I say, I'm just trying to establish the habit of getting used to live streaming at this time of night. So I've noticed in 5th edition Dungeons & Dragons that there's been some significant changes to the cosmology that break a couple things from the old AD&D games, specifically to how the planes work from Planescape. And also they seem to have purposefully made a point to destroy Spelljammer for some reason, despite the fact that it still has kind of an underground following. There are people out there on YouTube who have been running spelljamming campaigns and whatnot, and I've been trying to direct the game that I had been running towards that path as one of the various options, for the players to find themselves wandering into, as a way also of my own efforts of trying to reconcile 5th edition cosmology with the old AD&D cosmology. And I think there's a way to do it without necessarily negating the old stuff. But there are some changes. For one thing, the biggest thing to the change in how the planes work in Dungeons & Dragons for 5th edition is that after 4th edition, there is the introduction of two new realms, the Feywild and the Shadowfell. And these two planes touch upon a variety of planes that should otherwise be separated by how old school Planescape divided the universe. The Feywild seems to touch both the inner planes and the outer planes, as does the Shadowfell. And that shouldn't be. The old bridge was in the center, you have the prime material plane, and then above it, you had the astral plane as kind of a bubble that would lead into the outer planes or the upper planes. And in the other direction, from the prime material plane, you had another layer of the ethereal plane, which was your gateway into the inner planes of, the raw elemental forces. And, especially the Shadowfell has a lot of bleed over with the ethereal, which should also, in my own head canon, affect how the domains of dread work from Ravenloft and whatnot. And then you get over to the stuff that they have said about Spelljammer, where apparently for the Spelljammer setting, and the reason why you don't have Spelljamming as a thing in 5th edition and interstellar travel as a thing in 5th edition on the prime material plane, despite the fact that they still describe the crystal spheres and that things like spelljamming helms and flying ships and earth motes and all that kind of stuff are still possible if you want to use them. But for some reason, they made the decision to burn away the Phlogiston, which was sort of like D&D's version of the Luminiferous Ether, this flowing river of rainbow energy that existed between the crystal spheres and interstellar space that ships could use to set courses between various realms and worlds. And I'm not entirely sure what the decision-making process was behind them, where they decided to just say it all burned away and hasn't returned. But thanks to the good folks at Drive Through RPG, who have a bunch of printed versions of old AD&D books available for purchase, I found this little thing from Spelljammer called the Astromundi Cluster. And I think it might be the answer to how to fix and reconcile the entire issues I have with the changes to D&D's cosmology without negating what AD&D had. You have to treat what AD&D said as being something from the past. This is old information. A lot of it still might hold true for player characters if you want to bring this material into your games, but things will have changed over the intervening centuries or millennia, depending on how long ago you want to say this all happened. My concept is basically this. Some of the main adventures in the Astromundi cluster involve plots from some of the big powers of that star system trying to blow up one or both of the suns that were in the Astromundi cluster. And my idea basically is, in headcanon, if you assume those adventures happened but obviously not with the player characters you're using, but just something that happened, and you just resolve it in your own head to decide how the adventure happened and occurred. Well, like say an effort to stop the Illithids from using a Sunslayer to blow up the smaller of the two stars was successful, but the Sunslayer still fired off, but it didn't blast into the sun itself, destroying it. Instead, at the last minute, whatever group of heroes and revolutionaries got together to avert this disaster, managed to knock the Sunslayer kind of slightly off target, and its blast shot off into space and shattered an area of the crystal sphere. And then later, while there's this damage in this big gaping hole leading directly into Phlogiston, the Antillian plot, where the Arcane we're duping the Antillians into creating this big gateway system around one of the stars, so they'd allow in Tanari forces to invade the Astromundi cluster. We'll say that was successful, but in the process of the gate destroying the star in order to be able to fuel itself, it created an explosion that ignited the Phlogiston, because the shell being cracked in that one spot allowed contact between the wild space within the crystal sphere and the Phlogiston outside. And that would be your event for blowing up the Phlogiston. Now, when the Phlogiston is destroyed, it creates something of a shock wave through the planes. Now, not a literal shock wave, but the effect of a shock wave. And the manifestation of that shock wave is the Feywild and the Shadowfell heading in opposite directions. And that's why they entangle and warp and change some of the way that magic and the powers that be work in the planes. It would explain why you no longer have the effect of, when you're traveling around the outer plane ring, that the further you get away from the plane of origin of your magic items, the more those magic items diminish. Or also how being further removed from the plane of origin of whatever power your character might derive their abilities from doesn't get diminished, and the character's effective level isn't dropped. Because thanks to the Feywild and the Shadowfell being there, now all planes are really only one plane away from their plane of origin, instead of being separated by this big long ring, or by being in the inner planes and you're trying to contact from the outer planes, or vice versa. I think also this is a good way to actually explain the true, quote unquote, backstory for how the Gith races appeared. In Astromundi, one of the main civilizations in the setting are mind flayers, Illithids, spacefaring, more intelligent, and not so much peaceful, but able to be bartered and negotiated with form of mind flayer society that you would find in your typical Underdark setting on a terrestrial world. And one of the human races that served them were called the Varan. And in my own headcanon, if the Varan were the ones that averted the sun destroying machine that the Illithids were trying to use to darken out the stars, maybe the Varan were actually the origins of the Gith. If you look in old AD&D stuff about the Gith, they do say that the Gith did originally start as a human race that was mutated. So my concept, basically, to explain a couple of things, is when the second disaster occurred. So you have the Varan uprise against the Illithids. They have a leader, and that leader was named Gith. And so from then on after, they called themselves the Gith. And the thing that separates the Githyanki and the Githzerai, without getting too much in detail about specific smaller setting things in Astromundi, would be basically their response to the rebellion. And when the Arcane used the Antillians to open the Dark Gate and destroy the other star in the Astromundi cluster, which then led to the destruction of the Phlogiston, you would have the group that would become the Githyanki were the people who were the Varan, who were in control of the Varan star fleet. And at some point, they may have discovered the secret that the space elves were using to pass through the crystal sphere wall without having to use an arcane gate, because they had figured out that if you had shifted your Spelljammer into astral space and then come back out on the other side of the crystal sphere, you could bypass the barrier. And so the Githyanki used that as a way to basically jump into astral space with their entire fleet before they are trapped forever inside the crystal sphere after the Phlogiston is destroyed. And the Githzerai, instead of taking a fleet with them, instead use an optional gate while the gate that had destroyed the star was still functioning, they slipped through the other way, and that was the way they were able to sneak into limbo, and colonies hidden in pockets of the deep underground of various worlds was cut off from itself. No. See if there's ordering's got a couple posts. This kind of shit is why people don't correct mistakes and only get further ingrained in what they said in the first. Okay, maybe Twitter's a bad idea. All right. Well, I said what I had to say about what my thoughts are about reconciling D&D's cosmology. This is a fairly short stream. Once again, if someone wants to jump into the chat here and bring some sort of subject up you'd like me to address, give me something to talk about. Like I said earlier today, I already had done kind of a special edition live stream just out of defiance of the whole concept of Blackout Day. I swear, some of these hashtags that come up on Twitter, like it feels like this is something that a CIA psyop or an international intelligence firm's psyop would be, to purposely try to get people to get divided over each other. Because telling a bunch of people that they're not allowed to post on social media for a day because of their skin color or lack thereof is really just a good way to breed resentment. So, yeah, I went ahead and did a stream. And so I talked most of the stuff I wanted to say today about recent rioting events and all that kind of shit. And I don't want to just keep retreading the same path. Also, in truth, all of us who spend a lot of time on the internet have to be careful about how this can distort our view of reality. It's kind of a trick. By its very nature, when there's something going on in the world and there's cameras out there, the cameras are going to be pointed at that thing, and they're not going to be pointed at the stuff that's not going on, because no one wants to watch that. No one wants to watch footage of an empty parking lot or people just shopping quietly somewhere. People want to see videos of people smashing windows and getting into fights and beating the hell out of each other or getting shot, and human tragedy in all of its glory. But since that's the only thing that the cameras are ever pointed at, it can start to give the impression that that's the only thing that's going on. And in reality, like, a good chunk of life is still normal. There's certainly a tenseness in the air when going about during the day, but people are still going about their lives and going to work and doing their stuff. It's just, as long as you're not living in very specific spots of certain cities, does this seem to really be causing people particular problems. And we gotta also keep in mind that the actual volume of protesters and rioters and people taking advantage of the whole situation to either steal things or to push whatever kind of fucked up agenda they might have, these represent a very small fraction of the total U.S. population. Even if the crowd looks huge, it's still just a drop in the bucket of the amount of people who live here, and the vast bulk of which are not storming the streets, and an outcry, against the system. That's why we're kind of, something I've said for years, but when shit hits the fan, your average American is going to gladly accept the police state if it means that they're going to feel protected from chaos. And we're kind of watching that right now. I saw a thing earlier that a poll says that like 71% of Americans, at least from the sample size of the poll, say they want the president to bring in the National Guard to put a harsh and immediate end to all this chaos in the streets. So, yeah. But the thing with polls is polls are designed to distort reality so that you can sell a narrative by convincing people that this is what the majority wants. And since people have an instinctive need to want to be accepted by the community and by society, it's a way to trick people into believing certain things, or to at least claim they believe certain things so they can feel like they're getting patted on the back. But so much of how a poll works is based on how the question is phrased and who they're asking. The psychology of the kinds of people who respond to polls, the sample size of the polls, Like, interviewing 5,000 people, is 70% of 5,000 really reflective of 70% of 330 million? Kind of a thing? Especially since it takes a certain kind of person to even want to bother to take the time to answer and talk to pollsters. So anytime you see any kind of polling information, have some heavy question marks hanging around that stuff, especially since in recent years, time after time, polls have fucking failed. But still, though, regardless, according to this data that came out today, an overwhelming majority of Americans do not want this situation to go on, and they want the firm, strong hand of authority to come in. And as much as there's this old youthful streak of me that is very much on the side of all the stuff that is going on, I also understand that we can't afford to live in a world where society has been burned to the ground. It's not a real humanitarian cause to destroy the very civilization that's keeping all of us fed. We can't all go out and hunt deer. We can't subsistence garden in our lawns. You can't feed yourself for a whole year on what you can grow in your backyard unless you're really good and talented and have a lot of resources and time to throw into gardening like that. And even then, are you really going to get enough food variety and all that kind of stuff? And just the demand for meat. And we can't shut all this stuff down. There's no way to decapitalize the system and keep it running without enslaving everyone. And well, yeah, okay, I'm already going into stuff I already talked about earlier today. So you can watch my previous videos for that kind of stuff. And otherwise, I wish I had a little bit more material right now, but like I said, I'm still getting used to live streaming, and I'm largely just doing this right now just to maintain getting into this habit of streaming at 1 a.m. here, Central Time, US. So I guess I'll see you tomorrow night. You'll have a good one. Oh yeah, and stay waspinated.